One of the most common visual effects in science fiction films and TV is a form of blurred trail of a vessel as it suddenly increases to maximum velocity and then disappears. The same kind of blurring effect is often used for other scenarios, also denoting very fast movement. But in the real world, our eyes rarely experience this fast blurring effect. The reason for this is down to something called saccadic masking. So what actually is saccadic masking? Why does it happen? What are the consequences of the masking? Well, when your eyes are tracking a fast-moving object, they obviously have to rotate in your eye socket or you have to turn your head. In general, when focusing or tracking an object, you'll be using both of your eyes. But instead of incremental movements, the eyes tend to flick together to form one point of reference. It should in theory mean that while the eyes are in motion, you should see a blurry effect between the jumps. Instead, the retina basically ignores all the blurring images between jumps as they're actually little use of the brain in giving an impression of the world around it, and instead skips between the two images. This actual skipping between the images is the saccadic masking. Your brain is so good at processing the changing images, you aren't even aware that there's anything missing in a fraction of a second it takes for your eyes to flick to the new location. The ultra-fast motion of the eyes tracking an object or similar event isn't even being consciously controlled, as the motion is actually just too fast for you to actively think about the process. Instead, the motion is controlled by a part of the midbrain known as the superior colliculus, or the optic lobe, which in a few milliseconds is able to adjust the focus point of your eyes to keep up with the rapidly changing and possibly threatening situation. This motion of the eyes is different when you're closely monitoring a much slower moving object. This slower motion can be controlled by your conscious mind, such as tracking moving finger or the tip of a pen during an eye exam. Here, instead of flicking from one location to another, your eyes use what's known as smooth pursuit movement, which is relatively easy to achieve tracking left and right, but far harder to achieve tracking up and down, presumably since our ancestors were rarely following a slow-moving object going up and down. The superior colliculus does appear to be involved in the motion of the eyes during smooth pursuit movement, but more in a supervisory function than in direct control. Possibly the optic lobe is ready to take control of the motion of the eyes if there's any sudden increase in speed of the object that we're following. So instead, the frontal lobe of the brain appears to be the part brain involved in direct control of our active thoughts involved in smooth pursuit, thus enabling us to follow a slow-moving object without losing a millisecond of the image whilst actually still tracking it, enabling our eyes to give the brain a highly accurate impression of the surroundings without any blurring motion effects or indeed any of those gaps hindering the impression of the vision. However, saccadic masking doesn't only occur when following a very fast-moving object. Masking can also occur when we enter into a new location, like moving from one room to another, especially if we've never been in the room before. Some people would assume that we get a general impression of the room from our peripheral vision. But for a new location, peripheral vision isn't really good enough to pick out any useful details of the unknown. What the peripheral vision can do is alert us to any changes in the known detail. Instead, when we enter into a new room, our eyes will rapidly flick around the room, picking out points of interest and registering those points. So if they change, we will then know about the change. We don't generally notice that our eyes are flicking around the room again, it happens so fast it's controlled by the subconscious, by the optic lobe, and the jumps are covered by the same saccadic masking. The brain therefore gets a fairly detailed picture of the new room in a second or two without us actually realizing it. We've basically scanned the entire room in a series of eye leaps. There are, of course, some occasions when blurring of motion can occur to our eyes. This can happen in a fast-moving car or train when you're looking out of the window at the road or train tracks as they whiz past in the opposite direction. For a fraction of a second, the eye can match the retreating velocity of the tracks or the road to give a temporary clear impression of what's happening. It takes less than a second to perform this action. Once the image has been obtained, the eye has difficulty in maintaining continual adjustments needed to capture more steady images of the scenery, and it just passes by in a blur of motion.